All right. There it is. All right. And my guest is Mark Hyman, Charles Moskowitz here. Uh, Mark, thanks for joining me. Your book is Pardongate: How Bill and Hillary Clinton and Their Brothers Profited from Pardons. And you're also spearheading an effort to replace destroyed monuments with two monuments. So let's start there. What's going on with that?
Well, actually, I'm not involved with the monument business, so that was someone passed something incorrect to you. So I'm not
Okay.
involved with that at all.
Okay. The Bill and Hillary Clinton used the pardons, especially in the last few days, even hours of his administration. I understand that when Bush took office, he literally found pardons on the desk that Clinton was feverishly signing that morning, and just moving them out the door. Mostly, it seems, and I think in the case of the Clintons, a lot of it was just sheer corruption. I mean, they were selling them. I mean, they were her brothers got pardoned, Clinton's brother got pardoned, Mark Rich, which is the most famous one. This was for money. I mean, they got millions of dollars to help build the library and set themselves up after office. But there was also some pretty ugly political pardons. So talk about Bill Clinton's pardons in his last months in office.
Well, actually, we have to start off by talking about how Bill Clinton was when it came to executive clemency in his first 6 years as president. As a matter of fact, in his first term, he was among the stingiest presidents of all time. He only gave away 56 executive clemency decisions in his first term. Only Thomas Jefferson, the third president of the United States, gave away fewer. He gave away 45 in his first term as president. And there were only 5 million people in the country at the time. So Bill Clinton, really in his first 6 years, he gave away 77 executive clemency decisions, in spite of having looked at over 4,000 applications. But he went from being the stingiest president to one of the most generous of all times. And it really started 2 weeks after Hillary Clinton announced she was going to run for the US Senate. So Bill Clinton went from being stingy to being really generous. The first batch of pardons he gave away, and they were actually, I should correct myself, they were commutations, but executive clemency decision. The first batch he gave away in August of 1999 was to 16 FALN Puerto Rican terrorists who didn't even request executive clemency. He just said to them, hey, folks, I'll give you commutations. You just go ahead and accept them. Why would he do that? Well, New York State politics, or I should say New York City politics, are very balkanized. They're really divided up along racial, ethnic, religious groups, and so forth. And politicians always pandered to them, but only the Clintons could give them executive clemency. Puerto Ricans in New York City typically vote Democratic. But Rudolph Giuliani, who was the presumptive Republican nominee before he was diagnosed with prostate cancer, was very popular in the Puerto Rican community. As a matter of fact, he had gotten 43% of the Puerto Rican vote in his last mayoral run. So you have a presumptive Republican nominee who could conceivably do very well in the Puerto Rican voting bloc, and that certainly had to be disconcerting to the Clintons. So Bill Clinton just approached the 16 FALN terrorists and said, guess what, guys? You can have clemency if you want it, even though they hadn't requested it. That started this whole process. And then for the next year and a half, Bill Clinton it was a free-for-all. As you mentioned a few moments ago, Charles, Hugh and Tony Rodham, which is Hillary's brothers, and Roger Clinton, which is Bill's brother, were in the business of hustling pardons for people in return for cash. Each of the three brothers made hundreds of thousands of dollars representing the interest of people who wanted pardons. And these weren't your run-of-the-mill, relatively anonymous people. You mentioned Mark Rich, certainly the most notorious of them all. But there were others as well. There were definitely really bad dudes. Carlos Vignali was a cocaine trafficking kingpin in LA. He was caught shipping 800 pounds of cocaine to Minnesota. He got a commutation. There was also the Cali cartel drug launderer based in New York City. He got executive clemency. How did he get it? Well, he happened to be pretty good friends with Harold Ickes. Harold Ickes and John Podesta, who were the
Hmm.
deputy chief of staff and the chief of staff of Bill Clinton. There were so many of these pardons that had ties to the Clintons one way or the other. And of course, the brothers profited literally by hustling pardons on behalf of people who were eager to pay them to give them pardons.
Well, I mean, I think it's safe to say that Bill and Hillary Clinton didn't do anything unless there was something in it for them. I mean, there's some political gain. They were selling lots at Arlington National Cemetery. They were selling nights in the Lincoln bedroom at the White House, to raise money. And there's some very troubling elements to that when it comes to dealing with the communist Chinese in terms of selling American military secrets and hardware. I'm not saying that that's true. That's an accusation that was made. I've heard back then that a lot of the issues that eventually did lead to the impeachment of Clinton and the Lewinsky business, that was really an attempt to divert attention from some of these more troubling matters with regard to funny deals made with the Chinese, with the Lipo group, which was an Indonesian group connected to communist. There seems to have been money. I don't think there's any political element, or it's just political power.
Oh, absolutely. First of all, I think for most people who look at this, it's got to be a pretty sad life that everything you do in life has to be geared for some kind of payback, whether it's political or financial payback. And without a doubt, the Clintons were showered with money, gifts, and influence when it came time to dishing out these pardons, hand over fist. It was certainly disturbing from that perspective. And there were so many people, as we've already mentioned, who were just simply bad dudes. It's not unusual for someone who perhaps was a professional, had a professional license, was convicted of a crime, did his or her time, and then returned to life, a good citizen, and said, "Look, I'd like to get my conviction wiped clean because if I can remove this felony conviction, I can get my professional license back and get back to the business of which I did, whatever it was. It could be something as simple as a professional fisherman's license, but I want to do my chosen career." And those are the times where you think that's a compassionate president, because that's what executive clemency is. It's government's official forgiveness for a crime. So those make a lot of sense. But there were so many of these that were doled out to people who didn't even accept responsibility for the crimes. The Department of Justice has lots of guidelines when someone submits a clemency petition to get either a pardon or a commutation of the sentence. And among these, the first one is you just accept that you were guilty of the crime and you show some level of remorse. There were folks who received clemency who were indignant, claimed they were innocent, claimed they were framed. They didn't meet the basic threshold. But it's even worse than this, Charles. On Bill Clinton's final day in office, he gave away 140 pardons and 36 commutations. Of those pardons, 47 people had their clemency applications completely bypass the Department of Justice and the FBI. Justice Department reviews a clemency application to make sure all the information is in it is correct. The FBI reviews it to make certain that people haven't engaged in further criminal activity since their last conviction. Then it goes to that process. Then it goes to the president for the president, he or she, to make a decision on whether they're going to approve or not approve clemency. 47 didn't even go to the DOJ or FBI. It gets worse. 30 didn't even submit clemency applications. On that final night, the wee hours of the morning, Bill Clinton was writing names down on slips of paper and handing them to the pardon attorney and said, "Give this person a pardon." The pardon attorney didn't know who they were, what crimes they'd be convicted of. He was busy searching the internet in the wee hours of the morning, trying to figure out who these people are, what crimes they were convicted of, and how to reach them. That final day, there were people who had their names misspelled on their pardon certificates. The certificates were mailed to the wrong address. In some cases, it just said, "You're pardoned for your federal crimes." Didn't even explain what the crimes were. That's how bad the process is. And a lot of these folks who got those pardons and commutations had some sort of connection with the Clintons, either directly with the Clintons, or they were friends of friends, or they were friends of the circle, or they were people that had the interests represented by Hugh and Tony Rodham and Roger Clinton. And one other point I want to say,
Yeah, please.
there's been a lot of criticism of Bill Clinton pardoning his brother Roger. I would say, if you can't give your brother a pardon, then who can you give it to? I mean, if nothing else, imagine how ugly Thanksgiving would be if Roger looks across the table and says, "Bill, you pardoned 400 and some odd people. You didn't pardon me, really? So I give him a pass on that. If you can't pardon your brother, who can you pardon?
All right, my guest is Mark Hyman. The book is Pardongate: How Bill and Hillary Clinton and Their Brothers Profited from Pardons. There you go. Mark, there's to show how, I mean, political and how, in a way, craven the Clintons were. There's a story that has circulated for years, and it was, I believe, a Secret Service agent, I think it was Patterson who actually started it, who pointed out that Bill Clinton was alerted by his national security advisor that they knew where Osama bin Laden was and that they were ready to take military action. And it took them several hours to find Clinton. I mean, who knows what he was doing? I mean, we know he was involved with who knows what. But when they finally did find him, he had a meeting in the Situation Room in the White House, and he decided to do nothing because he felt like, hey, there's nothing in it for us. There's no political gain by doing this. And it just kind of is an interesting insight into how he thought about things. What do I gain politically? What is in it for me? Not whether it's right, whether it's the good thing to do. And I think that has everything to do with his decisions on these pardons.
Oh, absolutely. There were people who received pardons that you look at them, they just seem relatively anonymous. There's nothing to it. And I have to tell you up front that I didn't start out looking at this as a task. I actually was working on a different issue and stumbled across this. And as I uncovered details, I saw more and more of these clemency decisions they smelled bad. There were things wrong with them. Well, I'll give the example of two men from Arkansas who were convicted of tax fraud. Not a big deal. It's not a violent crime. People do it. They get caught. But these two men are from Arkansas hired an attorney from a New York City law firm who had never prepared a clemency petition in his entire life. They hired him to prepare this petition, their petitions, which he filed 4 days before Bill Clinton left office. They got pardons. Well, how did it come about? A couple guys from Arkansas hire a guy from a big New York City law firm. Well, William Cunningham, the attorney who prepared his first ever clemency petitions, was also the treasurer of the Hillary for Senate campaign. So once again, it comes back to the Clintons. There were so many people who were able to profit politically or financially from getting people pardons and commutations. It happened time and time again. We've documented at least 50 instances where the individual who received executive clemency in Bill Clinton's final year and a half of office either directly had a tie to Hillary Clinton or the people lobbying on their behalf had a tie to Hillary Clinton. Richard C. Riley, who was a longtime education secretary for all of Bill Clinton's term, had his son, Richard Riley Jr., pardoned for his cocaine drug activities. Well, Richard Riley was also the national campaign chair for Hillary for president. So it keeps coming back. There are always favors for people. And let me add one more thing to this. Some listeners may say, or some viewers may say, you know what? The president's pardon power is absolute, so that's what he decides. Here's the rub. There were 1,500 people who submitted clemency applications properly, went through the Department of Justice review, went through the FBI for criminal review. Their petitions were never even looked at. Bill Clinton left 1,500 people sitting on the table because he was too busy writing names down on a Post-it note or slip of paper and giving it to his pardon attorney and saying, pardon this guy, whoever he is.
Also, I think it's safe to say that the Clinton pardons were used as a way to set them up after the White House, not just in terms of Hillary's Senate seat, but the Clinton Foundation, the Clinton Global Initiative, these massive slush funds, these schemes that they had to basically continue this practice of shaking people down for money, awarding their friends, punishing their enemies, buying influence. I mean, as Secretary of State, I understand the reason everywhere Hillary Clinton went, there'd be payments to these slush funds, including by some gun runners in the Middle East and some other shady regimes. And she was using her office to offer people favors in exchange for money to these quote unquote nonprofit groups. And I think it's interesting to note that immediately after Hillary lost the election, she completely took down and disbanded and dismantled the Clinton Global Initiative. I wonder why.
Oh, absolutely. In fact, I make the case that the Clintons' 2-decade pay to play scheme they ran started with these pardons. And that pay to play scheme enriched the Clintons personally to the
Oh, yeah.
tune of nearly $250 million in personal wealth. And it was billions of dollars of the B to the Clinton Foundation. And as you so accurately point out, Charles, that right after the November 2016 election, the Clinton Foundation laid off most of its workforce because all the contributions just disappeared. So all these foreign governments and foreign leaders and international figures who were donating millions of dollars to the Clinton Foundation, clearly with an expectation there was some kind of payback, stopped writing checks on that Wednesday after the first Tuesday in November of 2016 because they knew there was no payback coming. But the whole pay to play scheme began with these pardons. The Clintons, to include the Rodham brothers and Roger Clinton, treated executive clemency like it was personal property. They could do with it as they please. Sadly, there seems to be a bit of a gray area here, even though the House of Representatives looked at some of these. There doesn't seem to have been any real criminal action in today's code that they could go after them. And of course, the three brothers didn't say they were selling pardons. They just said, we're representing the interests of clemency applicants. It had gotten so bad in Bill Clinton's final months that Roger Clinton was cold calling clemency applicants, offering to get them clemency in return for a cash payment. One of those people that he contacted had said to me, one, how did Roger Clinton even know I applied for clemency? And two, how did he get my personal cell phone number, which I don't give out? Clearly, somebody in the process, either the Department of Justice or perhaps more likely, Bill Clinton gave him the names with the phone numbers and said, here's who to call.
And the Clintons, if nothing else, were brilliant lawyers, and they knew how to always be just one step ahead of the law. They just he technically had that power. It's in the Constitution to give pardons. Of course, the founders didn't expect a Bill Clinton to come along and use it the way he did, but they never would quite cross that line. I mean, except of course that he perjured himself before a federal judge in the Lewinsky case, which led to his impeachment. But that was really the only time they ever really kind of got him on something. And I think they've continued to operate like that, just always moving along one step ahead, always taking advantage wherever they can. And, like a couple of vultures. I mean, it's really a disgraceful uh, career, one that should be viewed in that way.
Well, some people have asked me when we're talking about Pardongate, how Bill and Hillary Clinton and their brothers profited from pardons. And people ask me, well, that was 20 years ago. Why did you come out with the book now?
Mm-hmm.
Actually, the book was written 13 years ago. I had stumbled across this issue and started working on it. But at the time, we could not get a single publishing house to consider publishing this book. Finally, an industry insider said to me, look, it's 2007. Next year, Hillary Clinton will be elected the next president of the United States. We only want books that genuflect to her, nothing that's critical.
Mm.
And so my book sat literally in bankers' boxes of notes for a dozen years. And we decided to spoke with my publisher, let's go ahead and give this a go. So we pulled it out and we got it out there. And part of it is instructive. We should never allow this to happen again. My colleagues in the national media have no interest of ever looking at this, but this needs to be out there. People need to understand what had happened. And of course, I think there should be an answer to two questions, or answers to two questions. One, is Hillary Clinton finished running to be president? Two, is everyone certain that Joe Biden will be the nominee come Labor Day? Who knows what's going to happen in
No,
the
I
weeks
think
and
that
months ahead? But if it's a President Hillary Clinton, if she was involved in the sale of pardons, the hustling of pardons for money, gifts, and political influence, what does one think when she's President Hillary Clinton?
it doesn't seem to matter to the establishment supporters. They also, the day after she lost, they were no longer getting $500,000 to give a speech to Goldman Sachs or to fly Clinton to the Kremlin. to give a speech for $500,000. I mean, and then getting a big donation from that uranium company that was connected to Putin. I mean, that was covered by the New York Times. That's not some right wing rag who wrote about that. Um, I guess that my final question to you, Mark, is a loaded question, and you don't have to answer it. But and it's not directly related to your book. What do you think about the so-called Clinton body count?
I've heard comments about it. I know people have talked about it. I've never really looked at the issue, so I wouldn't be responsible to comment on it. But I will tell you, and this is really kind of tongue in cheek as far as I'm concerned, but when it was announced my book was coming out, I literally had some folks message me and say, "Wow, check your six. I'm serious. Make sure you know where you're going." And then I saw on social media last week somebody had started a post and they said, "People buy this book because when he commits suicide in a couple months, it'll become really valuable." And so I couldn't help but chuckle at that because that plays into the whole Clinton body count.
Yeah.
But I want to address one other issue before we go.
Mm-hmm.
My other book, which came out late last year, Washington Babylon, from George Washington to Donald Trump, Scandals of Rock Nation. I cover about 130 scandals throughout American history, everything from politics and sex to sports to entertainment to national security. But in there, I do address the Uranium One scandal at great length, which is that whole shady dealing going on where a guy who founded Lionsgate Media, which was the film company, eventually becomes one of the major uranium ore owners in the world. And this is all because of the great relationship he had with the Clintons. He also happened to be a guy who committed $100 million to the Clinton Global Initiative. So there was a point where he tried to buy uranium ore mines in Kazakhstan. This is a Canadian citizen trying to make a purchase for a Canadian company in Kazakhstan. And the Secretary of State, Hillary Clinton, had U.S. diplomats accede on his behalf to help him get the deal done. Why does the U.S. even have a role in a Canadian businessman making a purchase in a foreign country? But that's how bad this was. Again, using government resources and assets as if it's their personal property.
Yeah, I mean, it's typical of them, and it's certainly apparently typical of Biden too. I mean, if God forbid he does win, I mean, where's Hunter now? I mean, he's 27 trips to China, Ukraine. I mean, Finland, all these other countries where he was making these incredible deals. Anyways, and I'd like to have you back to talk about your Babylon book. That sounds amazing. I'd like to see. I want to read that one.
Oh, it's fun. I tell everyone it's a fun summer read. And essentially, Charles, it'll have you shaking your head, saying, "Really, could people be this dumb?" I'll tell you one quick story before you go.
Please.
So I cover everything from politics and sex and sports and so forth. But I have to be honest, If it wasn't for politics and sex, it would be a much thinner book. But I tell the story about Congressman Robert Potter from North Carolina, elected in 1828. And he was something of a jealous man of his younger, attractive wife. In August of 1831, he snapped one day, tracked down the two men he believed were having affairs with his wife, tied each one up, removed their family jewels, tucked him into bed, summoned the local doctor. And even then, the U.S. House of Representatives would not expel him from Congress.
Well, that's an interesting story in terms of why that is. But I'll have to take a look at that. Mark Hyman, again, let my viewers and listeners know where they can get your book and get more information.
Pardongate, how Bill and Hillary Clinton and their brothers profit from pardons. Certainly, it's available on all the online sites: Amazon, Barnes and Noble, Books a Million, Simon and Schuster. If any bookstores are open, presumably they're in there. But I know a lot of bookstores around the country are closed right now. But certainly, the book's available on Amazon right now. You get it shipped to your door the next day. I hope people take a look at it. Even the people who followed the Clintons for years will be appalled about what they read in this book, because pardons and commutations went to some really, really bad people. And then at the end of the day, there were some probably decent citizens who had legitimate applications in who never even got the time of day. Bill Clinton walked away from office at not having reviewed over 1,500 applications.
All right, Mark, listen, thanks again for joining me. It's been a pleasure. I'll talk to you soon.